I am a senior reporter and producer at AJ Plus. I studied politics, like international politics in college, and then I figured out that I wanted to do journalism my senior year of college, which was very late. So I did grad school at Northwestern for a year. And that landed me in DC, which is where I got my first job in journalism. I started at Voice of America and then I quickly moved to AJ Plus. I actually got in for uh, like a 2 week role where I was filling in for somebody's PTO. And I started as an associate producer, and then they really liked my work during the 2 weeks I was there. So I came back full time and I went up the ranks of an associate producer, and now a senior reporter. I'm on the original field reporting team where I make like long form and short form original reports for social media. So yeah, it's been about like 8 years since I've been in this industry now. Yeah.
What was the thing that like spurred your interest in, shifting to journalism?
When I was in college, my third year, I did a year abroad, well, a year away from campus. So I did a semester in DC and then I did a semester in Beijing because I had grown up learning Mandarin my whole life, because I grew up in Singapore. And I continued to do that in college because I loved keeping up my Mandarin. And I've always wanted to go and spend more time in China. And I was particularly interested in covering like Chinese politics or learning about Chinese politics and international relations. So during my time in Beijing, I got to intern at CNN and the Beijing bureau in CNN. And when I went, I realized that the bureau there was very small. It was like one reporter who had just started his job in China, didn't speak any Mandarin, and like one producer. And so actually as an intern, there was a lot for me to do. And because I was also younger, I was like more in touch with social media. I think I had a lot of fresh new ideas that I could bring. And I was able to help the correspondent a lot with speaking Mandarin, doing interviews. He was really helpful in encouraging me to, do a lot of things like interviewing, trying to film things. So I learned a lot, and I think that was the highlight of my time in Beijing. And I realized finally this is what I meant to do. Like, this is what I love to do, is because I grew up knowing many languages, always kind of feeling like I didn't belong in one specific place. But then I saw this career where I could use all of my language skills and I could connect and tap into different communities. And I've always consumed Western media, American media, thinking that it wasn't always the most representative of my community. And I thought that I really wanted to go into this industry and make it better. And it was also something where I could embrace all of my skill sets and all the different sides of myself. So that is what spurred my interest to go into journalism.
Wow, no, you definitely had a more immersive, like, full on internship experience than most.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, helping someone
Unpaid,
who
but it
doesn't,
was nice.
of
Yeah.
course, always unpaid.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, definitely, I'm sure the correspondent was grateful for you for your, language skills and all of the other ideas. Um, and since you kind of, mentioned that, really talking about your, languages and just culture and kind of wanting to bring that in, how do you incorporate diversity into your stories, whether that be the sort of stories you're pitching or assigned or who you're maybe, sourcing?
Well, to begin with, in my newsroom right now, I am the only Korean, and I'm also the only person who speaks Mandarin as well. So I alone have been able to pitch a lot of stories that maybe a lot of my colleagues aren't able to be aware of. So that in itself, I'm able to pitch a lot of stories that people may not know about, but I think that deserves attention. So that's another way that I've been able to tap into it. And I've been able to travel to Korea, for example, to report. And because I speak the language, I've been to I've been able to work on stories that no other person in the newsroom has been able to do. For example, I worked on a series of stories about adoption and adoptees, Korean adoptees who were traveling back to Korea to look for their birth parents because of fraudulent adoption papers. There was one time I was covering the hurricane in New York, which made a lot of the homes flood, and especially the basements flooded first, right? And as you know, New York housing is very expensive, and there are a lot of immigrants living in basements of other people's homes, even though that's illegal. But most of the deaths that came from the hurricane were those basement residents. And I went to those immigrant communities, and of course, there's a lot of fear speaking out there. There's also language barriers, and I actually learned that a lot of the immigrants that were affected were Asian immigrants. And I think there's a misconception often in media that Asian immigrants are well off, or that always that narrative of like they're the good immigrants. They wouldn't, live in illegal homes, and so when I was able to highlight a lot of these Asian immigrants, who other media outlets, no one was able to access them because of language barriers, but also was able to do a lot of trust building. And I got those unique stories out, and that performed really well. But also, I think there was really positive response from the communities for highlighting these stories that often don't get told in mainstream media. So yeah, so in terms of like pitching, using my language skills and being able to find interviewees who are the most impacted, um, has been a way to bring diversity into the stories I report on and into the newsroom. Yeah.
Why do you think it is so important to tell the stories of underrepresented groups and also, consume those stories?
Well, I think the first aspect goes back to why I wanted to get into journalism in the first place is I always felt like there wasn't a lot of stories being told of people who look like me, or it was always one sort of stereotype or narrative. And I knew that that just wasn't the truth. And journalism is about truth telling, right? And so I really wanted to diversify that. And I think that's integral to trust building with the audience as well. Um, and I think journalism and the news industry is ultimately about telling the truth and also helping the audience widen their perspective to learn more about the world in places and communities that they themselves can't access, right? And so I think that's why it's important newsrooms also have diversity in the newsrooms, because then the journalist can access communities and tell the stories of the people who are the most impacted. And I do think that, people who come from minorities are often, unfortunately, the most marginalized and heavily impacted by a news event or news story. And so, if we want to be telling the truth, the full truth of what's happening, I think it's really important to be able to access that. And often, when a journalist parachutes in or isn't from that community, that can be really hard to do, or it can feel invasive. And journalists who have a cultural understanding, they understand the sensitivities, and so they're able to tell stories in a safe manner as well, where it respects the interviewees. And I think that really translates in your stories, especially for me, because I make videos. I think that kind of trust building, when the interviewee is able to trust the person behind the camera, that really shows. And that also helps the audience connect to that story more in a more authentic way.
Have any advice for, aspiring journalists?
I think for a long time, I didn't realize as a younger person that the things that make me different are my superpowers. So I always wanted to be more American or more mainstream. And I've always thought that I had to craft my pitches to be more mainstream. But being in this industry and seeing all of my past successes, or seeing my past success, that has all come from me being able to embrace the things that make me different. So my language skills, where I grew up, and all of those things contribute to me being able to tell when a story is going to be good and it's not being told anywhere else, or it's been people to help me get access to interviewees that no one else has been getting. So I would say to younger people to embrace all of the differences that you have because that's actually your superpower and that's what's gonna set you apart from others. And so I would say like keep pitching stories that you don't see anywhere else. Think about, what are things that I can tell or I can access that others can't. I think that would be a great way for people to cut through the noise because there's so much noise right now. And with AI and technology, as you said, I think it's really important to embrace the human aspects of life and to really embrace authenticity. I think people want to feel connected to real humans, and that will always be there, regardless of how advanced technology is. And so, yeah, so I would say like embrace all of the human aspects, the human stories, and try to reflect like who you are as a person, and that will reflect in your stories as well.